Hello, I am Danette Batiste, CEO and Executive Director of Healthy Heart Nation, and I have the pleasure of welcoming you to another Heart to Heart Healthy Heart Nation conversation. Healthy Heart Nation is a nonprofit organization dedicated to eliminating disparities in the Black community. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. Since its inception in 1949, Mental Health Awareness Month has been a cornerstone of addressing the challenges faced by millions of Americans living with mental health conditions. This month is dedicated to eradicating stigma, extending support, fostering public education, and advocating for policies that prioritize the well-being of individuals and of families affected by mental illness. Mental health issues are prevalent in the Black community, with research suggesting that the adult Black community is 20% more likely to experience serious mental health problems, such as major depressive disorder or generalized anxiety disorder. The Black community faces systemic barriers to mental health treatment, including stigmas associated with mental health concerns. So, let's talk about it. Today, I am joined by my co-host, attorney Devonna Roseberry, who also serves as Justice Chair for Healthy Heart Nation. Welcome to the show, Devonna. Please tell us more about you and why this topic is so important.
Oh, good afternoon or good evening. Yes, I am attorney Devonna Roseberry, and I am the Justice Chair of Healthy Heart Nation. Mental health and mental wellness is extremely important to me. Not only is it a part of the work that I do in the court system, but I also have a child who has mental health diagnoses. So she is an advocate for mental wellness, and I am as well. That is why it's important to me. In addition to having a family member, I also have some friends, some close friends who also suffer mental health challenges.
Fantastic. Well, why don't you bring on our guests for the show today?
All right, absolutely. So our first guest is Heather Willis, and she is a licensed professional counselor and a therapist with Clarity Counseling Associates. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you.
And do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. So, as you said, my name is Heather Willis, and I have been in the mental health field for over 20 years. And I am the owner and proprietor of Clarity Counseling Associates, and we meet with individuals in Oakland County, Michigan. I also work for the local community mental health here in Oakland County, Michigan, where I am in leadership with the Behavioral Health and Justice Liaison team, and we work in the jail and in the prosecutor's office. We're building an assisted outpatient treatment program. We have co-responders that go out into the community and do on-call treatment services and providing resources to individuals with the police and the sheriff's department. So just really invested in mental health services in Oakland County.
Okay. That's amazing. We also have joining us this evening, Marla Thomas. Marla is the CEO of a nonprofit organization called Loving Beyond Reason. And I also have the pleasure of sitting on the board with Marla at Loving Beyond Reason. Welcome, Marla.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I'm so glad I have to always start by saying thank you for opening up the lane for this conversation. The conversation around mental health is so needed, and every single solitary conversation, regardless of the content and the who, is worth having and hearing. I'll just say this, that, my unfortunate interaction or intersection with mental health has to do with my children. I've got 3 adult children, and have been struggling with behavioral issues that we later understood to be diagnosed as mental health issues. So between two of my adult children, our family has experienced 7 critical diagnoses between the two, that we have had to learn to understand, and that we have learned had to learn to actually accept and then try and manage. And that is coming from a dual perspective at all times. Number one, always having the compassion and the dignity for those who suffer, and then always trying to basically understand, so we can better serve them by our responses, because you can't do that if you don't know what is going on. And so education from the family is where we focus with Loving Beyond Reason, especially when you get into dealing with adult children, because beyond the age of 18, there's really not much you can do without their buy-in.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think I want to first start off by addressing kind of the state of mental health in the Black community. Heather, can you kind of speak to that? Just, where are we as a community as it relates to mental illness?
Okay. So May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I'm wearing my green to represent the colors of Mental Health Awareness Month. And it's important for us to recognize how common it is, because a lot of people don't realize that there are a lot of people with mental health diagnosis or mental health concerns that just aren't addressing them. So you say if there are 50 million Americans that experience mental health disorders or mental health concerns, there are 21% of African Americans out of that number who experience mental health concerns. And the thing about it is that we're only like 13% of the population. So if you consider like that disparity in the amount of mental health diagnosis, it's really a really large amount when you look at it like that. So you think about what causes this: poverty, bias, insurance. A lot of people just don't have insurance, and some people who have insurance don't have mental health coverage on their insurance. Stigma, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. So all of these things come together, especially even in like the Black church. Trauma. I mean, we can talk about this all day. In the Black church, you have people who don't acknowledge trauma, who don't acknowledge the bias, who don't acknowledge the need that is there, and they say, oh, we'll pray it away, or we'll do these things, oh, you acting crazy, you see so-and-so acting crazy. And there are people who are afraid to ask for help because they're concerned at how they're going to be viewed. So when you have that and you have young people coming up, it affects them in a different way. One thing that was very concerning to me is that suicide was the 3rd leading cause of death in Black female teens. So you think 9th grade through 12th grade, right? And that's very concerning, because that's 60% more likely. African American females are 60% more likely to attempt suicide than their counterparts. So these numbers are very concerning, and it's something that we should be talking about. And I don't think we talk about it enough.
Agreed.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that's a big reason that we wanted to have this heart-to-heart conversation this evening, to certainly shed some light. I think this definitely, I'm hoping it will be an ongoing conversation, because, like you said, it's much needed. So there's one thing you touched on, and I'm going to ask Marla about it. The word stigma. I mean, we hear that a lot. And what does that actually mean? Like, what is that? Is stigma just the stigma of diagnosis, the stigma of terminology? You hear a lot of people use the phrase crazy, retarded. These were words we certainly used to hear those a lot. And is that what we're talking about when we're talking about stigma, Marla?
Yeah, that and more. We're really talking about the label that we put on somebody based on their mental health, whatever they're affected with, that is derogatory and negative. It's and let me just say this: it's very important to understand that, you know, these personality disorders and these brain differences are they result from several things. Number one, a lot of the times you have a proclivity, there's something already existing in you, but also they are also environmentally sparked and shaped by certain environmental impacts and traumas and things of the sort. Nonetheless, once we go here, and once we understand that, I put it to you like this: it's imagine how hard it is to deal with someone calling you something or labeling you with something, and your brain balanced and you can dismiss it. When you don't have a brain balance and you're already struggling with identity, with esteem, with understanding, with an illness, with things that you're not even able to talk about because you don't understand them, and then someone labels you, how much further away do you think you drive them from the solution and the conversation and from the support and from the help?
Mm-hmm.
So what I've had to learn, number one, you know, and I say this, and sometimes I get caught up, you know, when it doesn't involve my family, and I'll, you know, every now and then I've thrown a couple words out the dictionary in my world. Like, I don't say crazy anymore,
Right.
because I think that differences exist in all of us. But let me put it to your audience like this, because this is, I like to do things where everyone can understand.
Mhm.
Each human being is born a teapot. 4 squares here, we were all born little teapots. A little teapot is the human. The little teapot gets water in it. That's life. You put water in the teapot, you put the teapot on the stove, you turn the fire on. That's stress. And when the teapot heats up too much, what happens? The valve goes off the top, it blows off its steam. You know that it's ready to manage the hot water on the inside. When you have a mental health issue and your teapot has a broken valve, you're not processing stress, period. It fractures you from the inside out. So what I've had to learn from my children, both personality disorder and bipolar 1 schizoaffective, which I will call that a chemical mental illness, that affects, you know, my son's chemical balance and dopamine and all the things, and you know, him being manic for periods of time, which drive further mental fractures. When I talk about that, what I want everybody to really understand is, how many times in your life do you encounter stress, starting from the time you were a child?
Right.
So how I've charted it is,
Immediately.
the first real impact that's low impact, elementary to junior high. Now I've got social implications, and I'm trying to deal. So a lot of the times, this is when the kids will introduce themselves to substance, marijuana, whatever, because in their desperate attempt to normalize, they sometimes find these avenues to try to assimilate into normal preteen life. Then you start getting into social issues and relationships. Then you go to high school, stakes go up. And now you got this as a stress. And you don't have the tools. You're the broken teapot. So then you get all the way almost to high school, and in 11th grade, what starts happening? What are you going to do with the rest of your life? What are you going to do? Where are you going to go to school? And then let's add to it being Black families who as much as we love, we usually, in a lot of cases, project our experiences or lack onto our children. So what we really do in love is want them to do well, and we try to help them avoid the places where we fail. And it's not okay for my son to come in and say, I'm hearing voices.
Right.
Well, what are you talking about? You need to get a job. Like,
Right.
What? Voices? I tell you what, you better pick up the voice on the other end of the phone, and hopefully it offers you a job. I'm just keeping it all the way real.
No, yeah.
This is what we do. I hope you hear the voice of your employer calling you from the job, because that's what you need to have. Like, we go through all kinds of things, and we don't allow them to express safely in our homes. Wait a minute, I'm struggling with something. I don't even know what this is.
Right. And we actually have to, like, essentially, like, look at where our parents are coming from. Correct. And our parents' parents are coming from, right? And so we were never really afforded the opportunity to sit in our feelings and to just decide that, okay, I have the option to whatever. Right. Like, it's like, oh, you all are raising your kids, to be soft, you're too accommodating, you're too whatever. Like, we just had to go and we just had to do it. And we just had to deal with the stress that we encountered. And, and it was almost that mentality that, like, by forcing us to go through the stress, the trauma, all of the things that we had to deal with, it was in our mind that made us stronger. Like, we are stronger because of the struggle.
Because we can endure all this, right?
Because
Let
those
me say this, because this is super important, because as we are on this panel together, what we aren't going to do is continue to facilitate the indictment.
Yes.
And so what I'm also saying is, yes, most Black parents, I put myself in that category until I could educate myself on what was really happening.
Right.
But because I know you're doing this from love, I want to say that. That's why our foundation is loving beyond reason.
Yes.
Because now we realize that we're having to love beyond what most people think is reasonable for your adult Black child.
And that reason is what? Understanding, right? Like, we're trying to understand it from our point of view.
Correct.
Okay.
And but so I have to say that because it's super important, because I don't want to turn off a parent who feels like, oh, see there, that no, I get why this is the only tool we have. This is where we're coming from. But I just want to open us up to the option of a different type of mental duress and suffering that our children could be going through. And hopefully today we can give you some solutions as to how you might approach that differently.
Absolutely.
So that the right type of help and redirection is possible.
Yes.
Right.
Sure. Absolutely. I was going to piggyback on that, because removing the fear and just remembering, like, we love these people, right? Leading with compassion. We don't have to be afraid because it's something we don't understand. There's always room for growth and understanding, and then moving forward, getting the help and acknowledging that the normalization of the abnormal, right? It's different. You're differently abled, right?
Right.
Yeah. I like the terminology. I like the differently abled. I like brain differences. I love those terminologies, because it's actually, that's truthfully what it is. In my own situation, and my daughter has given me permission to share, is, I think a lot of times, let me just say this, I think a lot of times, certainly we parents, we don't know what to do. And then there's some denial there, at least in my situation. I think I had some denial, at the age of 17, when some things started, maybe not seeming okay. It's just kind of like, well, maybe you just need to get involved in some activities, or maybe you just, you don't want to, you just don't want that to be it. Maybe that's what it is, or that's how I felt. But at any rate, I think because of the work that I was doing, I kind of knew the steps to take to dig deeper and to find out what was really going on with her. In other words, I knew to contact a counselor. I knew to schedule a psychological evaluation, like right off the bat, so we could see, is there a diagnosis, what's going on, get the recommendations, and start treating. But not everybody knows those steps, So, and ultimately, she was diagnosed with, her initial diagnosis was major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety. Subsequently, we've got OCD, so, it's evolving, and, we deal with different things at different times. But Heather, how would you, or what would you tell someone whose loved one, who they may think that something is going on, or they may have an inkling that perhaps they need to take some steps? Like, how would you begin to guide them? Because like Marla said, we definitely want to, a part of this talk, we definitely want to leave people with resources and some direction.
And hope.
First up, I would say listen, because they want to be able to understand what their loved one is actually experiencing. because that's the first step, because you don't want to just jump out there and start throwing solutions and they don't fit the situation. The other thing is to recognize that you don't have to solve this. It's not up to you to solve it. Get your team together, get your supports together. The other thing I would suggest is that they check their trust level, because a lot of people in our community have trouble trusting outsiders. One thing that's interesting right now, it's a dynamic. I don't know if it's, you guys are all in California.
Yeah.
I'm in Michigan, and I know in Michigan.
I'm in Vegas.
Atlanta.
Vegas. Okay. So we have a clinician shortage here in Michigan, and they're in the nation. I think there are about 350 individuals who need mental health services for every one clinician. When you think about Black people who are providing these services, I think it's like 2% of psychiatrists and maybe like 4% of psychologists are Black people or African Americans. So when you think about the services that you're going to get, figure out how you can trust somebody because of what they know and what they can do for you, and not necessarily because of what they look like. At the same time, find the ones who do look like you, who may have availability, and their websites like Therapy for Black Girls. You know, you can go on Therapy for Black Girls and find long lists of clinicians who want to provide services to people who look like you. Also, look up your local NAMI. You know, NAMI is everywhere, and they can also give you a lot of resources. Most counties also have like a community mental health, which is funded through the government, local states. That's the public dollars that we pay our taxes for. And they are the ones who usually can assist those who have like the serious persistent mental illness. So you want to be able to really lock into the services that meet your need. And if you don't know what the need is, because you're like, hey, this is new to me, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. Where do I start? Find a crisis line. Call and say, hey, this is what I'm seeing. Can you talk to my child? You know, talk to my brother. He doesn't want help. What should I do? You know, also, I'm going to throw this out there. National Suicide Hotline is 988. 988. There's 911 for emergencies, physical emergencies, 988 for mental health emergencies.
Heather, I hate to do this, but I'm going to have to.
Okay.
Have you called 988?
Well, I have to say that the numbers are routed to local agencies. So it's a national number. So like here in Oakland County, we actually contract the services in Oakland County. So we track how well they do. So we're on top of it here. I'm
only saying that because I had to call NAMI myself, and I was promoting that on our show. And there was an emergency that happened on the street that I got involved with someone who was mentally ill, young lady who was standing in traffic. And I called 988 in real time. And I was hot. I was like, okay. But I have to say this, not because over time, things work themselves out. So please hear me. But if it is, I have to say this to be responsible. If what you're dealing with a loved one is a safety issue, 911. And then let me help you understand de-escalation, because I'm just trying to tell you.
Can I pick
988? They asked me 4 questions. Are you a vet? Are you LGBTQI? Are you? And then they asked me then the last one was, and if you're not any of these other 3 things, suicide, then hang on the line. And then they wanted to redirect me to my local office. And I'm like, well, I'm standing in the street with somebody right now. Somebody turned on her. It was a problem.
So yes, and that is true. If there's an immediate emergency and there's like danger, both lines will work. If you call 911, ask for a CIT trained officer.
Now that is the right. Well, I was going to say the next thing would be for me to also walk you through the steps of de-escalation, but I have to say it in that way because when you're in that moment, which I have been multiple times with my son, that help is now, and we would have had a severe situation physically had I not been able to know de-escalation, but call 911. 988, and when I call 911, I always start by saying, I am the mother of an adult child who is diagnosed with a mental health challenge. We are in an episode. and I need assistance, and I explain it, and I meet them off site, and I bring them to the home. I clear my house. Nothing else living should be in that house. If take everybody else out, because the police are going to get there, and the job of a police is to protect and serve as it relates to crime. They're not therapists. So the more you can help out by saying, hey, I met them, meet me off site. I say, I need 2 officers. One can stand by quietly, and only one needs to talk. I'm not going to speak. What my son wants most is to be heard, and his father and I listen. Sometimes it's not enough. So when you go in, he's hearing voices, and I have never had a problem. And he's always been willing to go with them versus having and before they get in the house, you can hear him screaming down the street. You can hear him losing his mind upstairs. I'm just saying it's very violent, but it always has worked for us. And that's one of the things that I'm really determined to teach to the Black community, because we're at risk more than others.
Marla, really quickly, we got a question. Really quickly, there was a question from Terry Parks. He wants to know, what does LGBTQ have to do with the mental health crisis?
I'm just telling you what it says.
Okay, so you don't know like why that was the case.
And they asked, was I a vet? They asked me, was I? So maybe there's a different. All I can imagine is that the LGBTQ community may have a different set of, because maybe if you're being, and I'm assuming, if you're being bullied or if you're being threatened as someone who's from the LGBTQ, then whoever you're connected to might have a different insight into how to treat you and walk you off of that crisis scenario for you if you are LGBTQ. That's all I can imagine.
Okay, and how do you know?
Was asked.
Okay. Well, so some of what Marla said about being able to align them with somebody that they can identify with, peer support is really big right now, super important. In addition, people, especially people of color who have a LGBTQI, throwing that I at the end, also tend to have very high levels of mental health concerns.
Yeah.
Also, they are targeted a lot. You think about people who are in danger, transgender women, men to women, have such high rates of murder. People are killing them. So you think about depression, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder. A lot of these things you will find in the LGBTQI community. So that also gives them a heads up. I think it's also important to know the services that are available where you live. Like I say, I live outside of Detroit, but I hear all the time how what we have in Oakland County is very different than what we have in Wayne County or in Washtenaw County or in Macomb County because of the taxpayer dollars, right? I do believe that CIT is
CIT stands for what?
Crisis Intervention Training. So what we do, and I'm one of the instructors, so I talk about CIT all the time because it's really something that's amazing. We go out and we train law enforcement how to identify. I train them specifically on psychotic disorders so that they can show up and be compassionate and not make fun of somebody, and how to get them, like you say, de-escalate them, get them off of the ledge and build that trust. Because especially if you already don't trust the police,
right?
Which
most Black people.
Okay, right? Yeah. And then you're hearing voices, and you might be hearing voices that these people are coming to kill you.
And generally, they are very, very caustic with law enforcement.
Yes. So a CIT trained officer will be more likely able to show up and not cause more harm.
And Heather, in the West, for us, it's the PET team, which is Psychiatric Extraction Team.
Okay, so it's
called something different everywhere. There's a SWAT team, there's a PET team, there's a CIT team.
But I think the important thing is to let our viewers understand that it sounds like there is whether it's PET or CIT,
right?
They should be asking for the officer that is trained in mental health crises. Is what I'm at.
Even if you don't have that, you need to be the one that is ready to train them. Like, in other words, because they're not always trained. As a matter of fact, 10 officers showed up to my house for my last incident. None of them were trained. And the outside my home, one of the officers, in frustration, said, if you know what to do, obviously you don't need me to even be here. And I said, sir, I said, I would not have called you had I not needed your intervention.
Right.
I said, but we're on the same team. And I
Right.
had my hands like this. I said, I'm his mother.
Right.
Right.
And this is beyond my ability to manage physically.
Right.
So all I'm asking is that just one of you be the one that speaks and just interact with him. He's not unintelligent.
Right.
So just, right. And it worked. What I'm saying is
Humanize him.
before
Yes.
you
Yes.
enter my house, don't treat my son like he's an animal in a cage at a zoo. He's
Mhm.
not. He's super smart. Matter of
Right.
fact, he's probably smarter than most of us. And he
Right.
just can't articulate it because he has that much brain activity going on. But
Right.
the reality is that, he doesn't sound like you would probably sound because we have stops and controls.
Right.
But the reality is, yes, and never let them bum rush your loved one. That's why I said you should be sure that if somebody, there were people in the house with our last incident. We cleared everybody out of the house.
Right.
Matter of fact, my oldest daughter was downstairs with somebody in the studio. She didn't even know what was going on 3 stories up.
Mhm.
I got them all out of the house. I said, oh, session's over. Let's go. I'm sorry, sir. I don't know you, but you need to go. We'll come back another day and do some music. Gotta go. I need you out of my house. Gotta go. And I didn't explain, but they had to go. So when the
Right.
police got there, they're
Right.
not
To
trying
minimize.
to manage the screaming
Right.
mother and, oh, don't hit my son, and
Right,
the crying
right,
baby
right.
and the barking dog. And all they're trying to do is neutralize what you have said is the threat.
Right.
Right. Right.
One
And that,
thing,
and I'm sorry. And I kind of mentioned the humanizing piece, right? So, as it relates to specifically Black men and the Black community, to try to humanize us is ongoing, right?
Right.
When you're dealing with any kind of mental illness, how do you overcome that barrier?
So one thing that I recommend is that when people get to a point that they discover their loved one is changing, right? And we're going to have to face some challenges together, right? We can overcome these things. It's about building allies is a big part of it. And one thing that you can do, especially as Marla says, maybe 988 isn't working for you. You know your system where you are. You can humanize your person by going to the police station up front, introducing yourself, saying, hi, my name is so-and-so. Who's, who do I need to talk to? Who's the neighborhood officer, right? And I have a son, right? We live here. This is what he looks like. He's a good guy. He's a good guy. He's got a mental health disorder. And, this is what it looks like. And listen, I can stop by periodically. You guys like donuts? That's step one.
Right.
Heather, I'm going to tell you that I have done that. And it has definitely saved my son's life. So I went to my local police department. I went to everywhere I knew he would trod. Therefore, I went to the Van Nuys Police Department, which is not my local, but he would walk everywhere. And I dropped off a folder that had a picture of him on his meds and a picture of him off of his meds. I duplicated this picture. And I made an actual chart of what we've been through with him through the years. And so with that in mind, and I said, here's my card, just so you know, if he's acting erratic, right now he's episodic.
Mm-hmm.
And he was in and out of the malls and, all the things. And so you can, you exactly what Heather's saying, you can get involved in that way. It's almost like being proactive.
Right.
Like I need to introduce you to my son and make sure you understand that I know that he's not, behaving with what would be societal norms right now, but that just means that he's in a mental episodic state. That doesn't mean anything else. So please, basically, I don't want him to get into a situation where he's hurting someone else who's aggressing on him and vice versa.
Right.
Yeah.
And as it relates to you, like making that call, as a mother for a Black son, what does that look like in the moment?
Scary. I mean, the reality is that, you try everything. The one thing I will say is this: if you are a parent who's dealing with, which by the way, I promise you, I get 5 calls a week. If you are a parent who's dealing with this in the moment, your first emotion is fear.
Right.
Your second thing is, does the second go-to you're going to have doesn't exist, which is reasoning. You cannot talk someone out of their alternate state of reality. That's real for them. That's as real as I am sitting here talking to the four of you. So I want to explain it like this because it's going to be really powerful. I've known Danette and Devonna pretty much most of my life, right? Through school, through ever. Right now, Danette, your name is Shirley. So anyway, Shirley, thank you for having me on Heart Nation. And you, look what she did. Everyone the first thing you're going to do is laugh because that's ridiculous. It's preposterous. It's dumb, right? But then Heather pipes up and says, yeah, I echo what Marla's saying, Shirley. And then Devonna starts calling you Shirley. And so the frustration that you're going to start to have to convince us of what is a reality that we all, you've agreed this is the way your life has been for forever. That's real for you. Your name is Danette. But all of a sudden, your kids, everybody starts calling you Shirley out of the blue. There's going to be an anger eventually that sets in because no one here is understanding.
The frustration.
Why are you guys calling me Shirley? Well, that's your name, right? So when they slip off into another reality, that's equally real for them. What we are living in is what I now call consensus reality. We consent to the rules of that's a stop sign. We stop our car. But in your mind, if your reality is gone, so to me, here's the thing for parents. What are you talking about? You sound crazy. No. Wow. You know what? I don't see it this way. But I'll give you a real one. My son asked me, how do I feel giving birth to Jesus? And I said, well, Dee, I'll be honest with you. I said, I don't know how that feels because I'm not aware that I did that. However, I know how it feels to have given birth to you and how much I love you.
Right.
So I didn't go into I didn't patronize the psychosis. Okay. But I also, I want to just keep reminding him of the core tenets of trust and love in our relationship. And then it is what it is, and I'm so and then it becomes genuine. I really hate that you're feeling this way. I really am, man, I'm so sorry that this is, that is there anything that I can do? And I'm very compassionate in that way. But I don't chastise him. I don't tell him that, you sound ridiculous. What are you, crazy? You know good and well that you're not Jesus and blah, da, 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 da. Because you're just going to agitate a reality that they can't relate to. And how do I know? Because when my son was arrested for walking around LA nude, it was a big story. Everybody knows now. We were on Dr. Phil, blah, blah, blah. When I went to jail and he was finally medicated while incarcerated, which is a whole nother problem, that's how we put our problems in prison when they really just need mental health treatment. He wasn't a violent criminal. But when he finally was medicated and we went in and I said, Dee, do you understand that you were walking around nude? He said, yeah, Mom, except at the time I couldn't have done anything different. And my mind just said, so in his mind, whatever world he was in, this was not an issue. This was not a crime. There was no connection with the laws over here in our consensus reality say this is indecent exposure. You got to have your clothes on before you leave the house. He doesn't, in his reality there. And so then just understand they don't forget. So as far as trauma is concerned, I need to share this with your audience. They don't forget. It's not, they're not going, oh, I was in a, no, they don't forget. And then it's harder and harder for them to come over here once we break their psychosis and live with the shame of their behavior.
Yeah. So because that's them. That's a part of them. That's what they did. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
So how much harder is it to come over here and be 35 and not being able to stay in a relationship and not being able to hold down a real job and knowing that you're super talented, but you're not in the mindset to be able to produce what you think your life wants to produce. And I'm in mourning as a mother, but how much deeper is it for my kids who are suffering?
Right.
So it's interesting that you brought that up. I just kind of had this come up today. Where my adult daughter, um, if I'm complaining about something that she has a hard time doing, she takes it totally to heart. And it's just like, well, I'm doing my best. I may not even be venting about her specifically, you know what I mean? But if she hears it, it's just like it hurts her, and it's like, well, because like what you said, it's shame. I think it's just shame that I can't do this or I can't do more. I'm not doing more. So it's interesting that you brought that up. I also wanted to touch on in Georgia, we call it a 1013. And I know that every state has a different number, I think, for it. I think it's always a number where, the person that's suffering sometimes is, involuntarily, we call it involuntary 1013. So, what does that look like? Because, I did personally have that situation with my daughter, and it was heart-wrenching. It's the hardest thing I've ever had to do. It was the toughest, I think it was 3 days of my life. I did not sleep. Just knowing, that she was someplace and I couldn't help her at that time. So, Heather, what is that process just for educational purposes?
So, yes. So, most people know it as like a petition for hospitalization. Petition, you might need to see a doctor for a clinical certificate. Depending on where you are, you can get that in the ER. A lot of counties will let you download it from the internet. The courts will have it. Probate court will have it on the website, and you can just download it and call EMS and have them take them to the nearest hospital. Here we have a crisis center where the police, EMS, family members, people can walk in on their own. But in addition to that, there's something called ALT, assisted outpatient treatment. And that is designed according to the mental health code to assist people who have difficulties with voluntarily seeking outpatient treatment or following through with their services, prescribed counseling services, medication, whatever it is. However, we talk about trauma, right? Ideally, we want to help people in the least restrictive environment according to what it is they feel they need. That person-centered plan is super important, right? But when you are taking them against their will, when they're not understanding, because maybe they're having a psychotic episode, right? Or they feel like they can manage things on their own, that creates another level of trauma. So being able to do that and get them connected to the services that they need and doing it in a way that is humane is super important, because it is very traumatic. It's re-traumatizing. And they're already, in many cases, afraid. They're already isolated. You think about when most people have their psychotic breaks, they're late teens, early 20s. You think about what were we doing in our late teens?
What is that?
So
do we know why
they call it the condition of stolen lives? Because
why that happens? Yeah. Do you know why that happens usually at that time?
I'm not exactly sure why it happens at that time, but it's very common, and it arrests their development. It stops them in their tracks at a time when they're still trying to figure out who they are, right? And then on top of that, you have an extraction team coming, taking them by force because they had this document to the hospital or to the crisis center, whatever it is, and they don't understand. So it can be very helpful. It can be very helpful because it's a means to treatment. Right. Yes, it's a means to treatment. It's important, though, to follow up with that and reassure them and be supportive. I had, before I started teaching the police on psychotic disorders, I talked to someone and asked them, like, what do you think is most important for people to know about your psychotic disorder? Like, what do you think it's important for them to know when they go and meet somebody in the community, maybe with a petition for hospitalization, right? And he said, it's a terrible thing to feel your brain melting.
Mm.
And if they can know that that's how we're feeling in this minute, maybe they'll be able to treat us better when they. So know that assisted outpatient treatment is a valuable tool, and it is there. It's available in most states. Most states. I don't know how many states, but even if you don't have the real quick, assisted outpatient treatment allows for it's like wraparound services, kind of. You guys are familiar with wraparound for kids? It's similar because it brings a team of professionals together to help you work through what you need and adhere to your goals. It also sets up through probate court a way to get hospitalized when you fall off of your goals so that you can continue with treatment, even if in that moment you don't feel it's necessary, because the court determines with your treatment team that it is necessary. And a lot of times it's saving lives.
And Devonna, I want to add to that, which is awesome. Thank you, Heather, for that's the kind of clarity I think we all need. But also to give you a couple of other names that when it comes to this type of intervention and hold, 5150 in California. 5150 is a 72-hour mandatory involuntary hold to deal with mental health crisis. You're diagnosed by 2 psychiatrists, and in that diagnostic process, it's decided whether you're going to be placed on a 5150, which gives you 72 hours of monitored and like she said, we just call it a wraparound where all hands are on deck to deal with where the goal is to stabilize you from an actual mental health episodic emergency. And or the doctor will say, which in my son's case, every time he's been ordered on a 5152, which is 14 days. And so, but unfortunately, up until recently, he was always let out after 6 days, and the stabilization wasn't always set. But in Florida, it's called the Baker Act.
Yeah.
So it's called different things, but essentially, in a crisis, there's a in the middle of an emergency, there's a hold that will supersede their will for themselves, because when they're psychotic, they're not saying, "Yeah, give me what medicine can I take to help me out of this?"
Right.
That's not happening. So
Yeah.
basically, at that point, which is why, by the way, parents, loved ones, caregivers, history is key. History is key. I can't tell you enough. History is key. It has been brought to my attention every single solitary time, ma'am. If you did not have the details, the recordings, the stuff that you were able to share with us on site, we would have left your son here. That was a quote. I said, and why is that? You can clearly see he's talking about the president. He said, it doesn't matter. He's a wobbler. And I said, what does that even mean? Because he was saying it was all me and Dave's fault. We're the problem. But when you listen, there's enough history that we were able to share where they're like, okay, he needs hospitalization.
Yes.
And so that history is, I'm sorry, is the history kind of just something about like journaling? I mean, should a parent take a journal?
Yeah, I did. My mother was impressed. I wrote it out like you might as well thought you were reading a hospital record.
Yeah.
And now
in meds.
I'm gonna jump in here. Keep your records, like Marla's saying. And Marla, I just want to affirm you because you are on your stuff. I just really appreciate it. Videos. Everybody's got a phone. I used to work for 7 years in a crisis screening unit, and I was the one that would get these people when they brought them in. And when parents are like, he's doing this, he's doing that, and this kid would come in and be like, no, I'm not. They're the problems. They're the ones that's doing all this. It really comes down to being able to see it, because people can pull it together long enough.
And they will.
Charged. Yeah. So absolutely record it, right?
Okay.
Video, photos, right? And your notes. Keep your records of medications, providers, timelines, and the people who need to be included in the information that goes out.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's super important. What she's saying is matter of fact, for those of you who would like, I know you might have to scroll a little bit. I almost feel like I should probably reboot it and put it at the top. But on my Instagram, Marla Talks, there's a live de-escalation in process that I happen to record. It's on my Instagram happening live. And so that's something that, for history's sake, it was really worth the watch, because I waited until it can be the educational moment. And so you can see them bring him out of the house, 2 officers. He says, "Hey, can you grab my clothes?" Like, and they end up taking him to the hospital, but it's all on live. So you could literally, I think it's one of the best tools that just happen to happen, that people can go back and reference, because, it's hard to imagine, like, you're in it and you can't even, every time there's a fear. And all I can tell you is that there's something in me that has to go completely. This is another thing. You have to learn to still yourself. And I said, still yourself, because there's so much information and input. And I'm a very passionate person, but when my son is around, I'm here. DJ, I hear, and by the way, I have to share this as well. I've learned to know what the voices are saying. I've learned that. I've learned to say, he calls to the network. We accept that he's hearing voices. We haven't been finding medicine yet that's been able to break that cycle. Even though it does help him with his agitation and bring him out of the psychosis, he still hears the voices. And I said, D, so what are the voices? I said, what are they saying? And he'll laugh. And I said, D, now that's not fair. I'm sitting here and I can't hear them. So you need to tell me what the joke is. And he'll laugh with me, but he will share. But when it gets irritating and when it gets agitated, and here's something that's interesting. When they begin to disassociate the relationship, you're not my mother, you're not my father. You're a monster.
That's the threat.
I'm in danger.
Threat level.
Because at that point, I know that if you're connected to the relationship, there's a connection there that's safe. Almost safe, because you recognize I'm your mom, and I know that as my son, no matter how irritated, you don't want to hurt me. But when you don't see me as your parent anymore,
right?
And at that point, I say
it's something different.
DJ, and I'll say this because I've had a couple pretty bad fights that God, was just with me. And I said, D, I have one good fight left in me. I can't do it tonight. So tell me where this is going to go. Shall I just go check into the hotel and leave you here? And if he's super agitated, I said, D, I'm going to have to call the police. I don't want to do that, but I'm going to have to. So what I'm going to do, and I never turn my back. I'm a DJ. What I'm going to do, this is how I sound. I'm going to step outside and I'm going to call the police, because I have to, because I don't want you to hurt yourself and I don't want you to hurt me or anyone else. I'm going to wait for them and then we'll be back. So, that's what you need to do. Call the police. Okay. I'm going to step outside, and I step outside and I call the police and I wait for them. And then we come back and I just let them go to the door. But the point that I'm making is I'm never, this energy you hear in my voice, it is gone. It's gone. You can't afford to, it's like this already, all this happening in there. So you have to be that thing that's like, hey, Danette, yeah, I hear everything you're saying. And I can tell that you're irritated. And I'm really sorry that you're in this much discomfort, but I can't help you manage it right now. So what is it that you know what to do? If you have a child that's depressed, like, I make sure that they have all the tools, because as crazy as it is, sometimes, and this is my final statement, and then I'm gonna let you guys have this right quick. I've now determined that my right hand is the hand of solutions and support. My left hand is the hand of chaos and drama for them. And I make sure they always know that the right hand is over here, but they have to come over here to get that. Because what happened to me is I'm gonna take my solutions, my right hand, and go to their left hand. Now I'm wrapped up in this thing, and I'm living as a schizophrenic in their situation, and I'm living as a borderline, and I'm living in drama left and right, day and night, and I'm the cause and I'm the reason. So I said, okay, I got to go over here, and I have to keep letting them know how much I love them. I have to keep letting them know, when you're ready, the help that we have will always be available for you. I'm never going to take that off the table. But you got to come over here and get that, because that's how I know you're ready. Right. Other than that, they drown us all in the issues.
Yeah, I kind of call it getting just kind of swept up in it. It's easy to do. It's easy to do, but it's not helpful
Mhm.
for sure when you need to be that still person, and you need to be the calm. So I was going to say, I know we've spoken a lot about psychosis and I mentioned the major depressive disorder. Um, I guess are there, and so Marla, you just mentioned if someone was diagnosed with depression, you would make sure they have the tools. What are some of the tools
Very
that
We're actually going to
Yeah,
look
go
at
ahead,
this
Heather.
as the last 4 minutes because we're going to need to
Okay.
wrap up. So, as we address the tools, Marla, and include that kind of in your closing statement, and then we'll get some tools from Heather as well.
I'm gonna let Heather go.
Okay.
Okay. So for psychosis, as far as tools go, I would say talk to your provider. First of all, get insurance. Get insurance. And if you have a young person who has private insurance under you, if they don't have a job, they still, or even if they're not working full time and they're maybe in school or whatever, they still may be eligible for Medicaid. Get both insurance because sometimes the public system provides more services than the private system. And then you would have that safety net. The other thing for parents, it's important to remember that this isn't about you. You don't have to take these things personally. Get your own therapist so you don't have to carry that guilt because they're going to have enough guilt to go around for everybody. Guilt and shame. For depression, gratitude journaling. It's great. It's very difficult to be depressed and grateful and complain at the same time. Usually you have to choose one. For anxiety, look into mindfulness. Lots of great activities on mindfulness on the internet. For psychosis, check out the injectables. There are a lot of injectables. Some will even last up to 6 months, right? Get a good
There's a new one now for a year.
Yes, I just heard about that. I don't know what, I haven't looked
My
into
son
it.
he's on an injectable. The last two doses have been injectables, and I've been able to talk to him for the first time in 6 years.
Wow.
Oh, that's wonderful.
That's
A great testimony.
Yes.
Be vulnerable, learn, get involved, volunteer, let your voice be heard, talk about it to people that you know, and then affirm each other. Be that warmth that people need and say it's okay. Be vulnerable. That's it for me.
Thanks, Heather. Appreciate
I
it.
would say this right quick. Understand, because everything she said on the help tip is 1,000%. Please understand your support group. And understand this. Do not hold it against family. One of the things I had to learn was my family means well. They just don't have the right information.
Right.
So when I understood that, I said, I tell you guys what, I know you call yourself helping. This isn't helpful. So here's a list of books that I'd like for you to read because then you'll know what the problem is. And then if you have some solutions, let's source the solutions once you've understood the information. Other than that, you got to, I need the people who are in my corner to understand how to help me in this heavyweight fight because you're the voices that I hear. I don't hear the spectators. I hear you in my corner. So if you're going to let somebody in your corner, they have to be versed in patching up an eye and what it takes to actually hydrate you and, rubbing it out between rounds because that's what it's like.
And I would assume self-care is also something that you have to make time for and be intentional about.
Definitely get your hair done where you look as close to Beyonce as you possibly can. And then
There you go.
I'm just kidding. There's a person here, she's funny too. Let her out. She wants to come out.
You're just humanizing yourself. Like and Beyonce's all of our humans. So come on. Okay.
Yes,
And
absolutely
Devonna.
absolutely take care of yourself. You cannot do anything until you do that for you because your loved ones who are in need are gonna need way more than you ever even thought. I pray daily that God gives me an extra measure every single solitary day of strength. And I'm gonna tell you, Heather mentioned gratitude. Never before until mental health kicked my door in and snatched out my 2 children that I find myself every single solitary day at the top of my list saying out loud, thank you for sound mind.
Mm.
I didn't even think it was possible for me to not have one.
Well, Devon, I'll let you close this out for us.
Well, I mean, I think that, first of all, thank you all so much. The wisdom that you have imparted during this talk has just been amazing. I think that we've certainly, I hope that we've certainly left some people with some tools, with some resources. We've certainly let them know that it's not, that it is common, unfortunately, and that these are just differences in the way that individuals think and act, and they're they're not their illness. They are still the loved ones that we know and love. They're still in there, and so I just thank you guys for this talk. Thank you for taking the time out, and I hope we can do it again because I think it's much needed.
Can I say one thing?
Absolutely.
I know we're over. For individuals who are having trouble finding the medication that works best for them, a lot of people spend a lot of time going through different medications, trying to get that right cocktail. I don't know if that's the word you want to use. Try GeneSight, GeneSight. It's a DNA test that they can run and tell you which medications will work best.
Oh, that's dope.
Yeah.
Could you repeat
And
that?
how they metabolize. Yeah.
GeneSight, GeneSight, GeneSight.
Nice. That's new. Thank you.
And I think just to piggyback off of that, it's very important. I do represent some clients that have some mental health diagnoses, and I try to just to encourage them. It's a common theme where will just stop taking their medication because it's not working. And so I do try to encourage them that, you may have to go through a few different medications before you find one that works for you. And also it may be a dosage thing, but you have to talk to your doctor about that. Don't just stop your medication. If your doctor doesn't know, that you're having this side effect or that it's not doing what it's supposed to. I mean, if you don't tell them, they won't know. And so they can't help you. So I think that is very important to leave with as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
We appreciate you all being here. We appreciate you all who have joined this conversation, heart-to-heart conversations. We are here every third Friday of every month with a topic related to health, education, business, or justice, as we are looking to eliminate the disparities in the African-American community. So we thank you all. We ask that you like and subscribe our videos and that you continue to support our work. Thank you and have a wonderful evening.